Welcome to the Spirit Sessions podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us where I'll help you find your true spiritual home, where every single aspect of you is holy ground, holy ground, holy ground, holy ground.
This is Spirit Session Podcast with Katie Silcox. Venga chicos, empezamos. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi everyone, Katie here. This podcast is intended to inspire you, educate you, and most importantly, support you on your journey towards knowing who you really are, that inner self, that inner teacher. I am not a psychologist or a medical doctor and do not offer professional health or medical advice on this podcast. If you are suffering from any kind of psychological or medical issue, please do the right thing and seek help from your qualified health professional. Hey everyone, happy fall. I hope it's as beautiful where you are as it is where we are. We have a really, really cool podcast for you today. I'm having a conversation with Ashley Turner, who has been a yogini friend of mine since back in the day. Haven't seen her in forever, and we cross paths again to have this really, really beautiful, deep conversation. All things yoga, energy, and her specialty, which is Jungian psychology, which is, as many of you know, one of my passions. I think you're going to find this conversation really, really cool. I really enjoyed talking to Ashley. And another big note, we have early bird pricing on Shakti School ending. It's ending in 2 weeks. So if you're considering doing our level 1 program in 2024, this really is the time to get in. It's the lowest price it's ever going to be. And it's going to be incredible in 2024. We have new teachers. We have Dr. John Douliard joining us. We've got the famous Mary Thompson back again. We have got a teacher who's going to come and teach us about Ayurveda for, guess what? Your pets. Ayurveda for athletes, herbalism, and as always, energy meditations that are going to really support you throughout the year. I hope to see you in 2024. And without further ado, enjoy me talking to Ashley Turner. You all, we are here with just such a cool special guest, a blast from my personal past. We're here today with Ashley Turner. You may have heard of her. Many of you have. She is the founder of the Center for Yoga Psychology. She has over 20 years as a yoga teacher and a licensed clinical psychotherapist. She has super innovative trainings that blend yoga, meditation, neuroscience, depth psychology, ritual, shadow work. That's all the stuff we love, Ashley. She's also an evidence-based yoga therapy practitioner, and she helps clients self-regulate, create emotional mastery, and heal on all levels. She has a year-long membership called The Haven. We're going to get into all this stuff, but I think the most important thing to say is that Ashley I met I feel like it was forever ago. I feel like both of us still look exactly the same. I just want to say #yoga works, but like we met years and years ago. It's probably been at least a decade at a yoga journal conference. And I remember looking at you and being like, you look like cousins. Like we could be family members. And yet, so much interplay on the same levels we both share. And here at Spirit Sessions, our focus is really about teaching women how to trust in that innate energy. And so, Ashley, we just with a whole heart want to welcome you to Spirit Sessions podcast.
I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Katie. I know, I feel like we're kind of cut from the same cloth and we came up at the same time in the yoga world. And it's so exciting to be here with all of you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, okay. First things first. I mean, let's talk about your past in order to kind of get into where you are now. You're obviously so learned in the area of psychotherapy.
I'm curious how that, how that led you into yoga and how you started combining those two things.
It was actually the reverse. I started in yoga. I was right out of college. Luckily, I met my very dear brother, Govindas, who owns Bhakti Yoga Shala here in Los Angeles. And he wasn't teaching at the time, but we became very close friends. And he introduced me to yoga literally almost as soon as I graduated from college. And I was in LA. And it just, I was hooked immediately. I was always really into fitness and I also had a really spiritual past. And so the two combined, just was next level for me. I never felt or seen anything like it. So I got really into yoga. I was practicing, then realized I wanted to teach. I started teaching in 2000. So almost 25 years ago, going on 25 years, and was teaching yoga and realized my own personal transformation and started to see how yoga was really healing me from the inside out, and my own depression, low self-esteem, body image issues that I didn't even really understand at the time. But I just knew that if I went to yoga, I was better. Things felt good. I would be good that day if I went to yoga. So as I started teaching and started seeing other students having the same breakthroughs, emotionally, maybe crying on the mat or just having aha moments, I really wanted to understand what was happening on the inside, psychologically, mentally, emotionally. How was it that 90 minutes on the mat, 60 minutes on the mat was so revolutionary? And so I decided to go back to school and get my master's in counseling psychology, in depth psychology in particular, at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Incredible institution. And become a licensed therapist. And then my whole life's work has really been to integrate yoga and psychology, particularly depth psychology, somatic work, trauma resolution, but weaving in these really deep practices that yoga is so rooted in, such as ritual, community, kula, all of these other ancillary practices that traditional Western psychology doesn't emphasize enough or as much. Maybe it's changing a little bit now, but yoga for me always was that bigger canon, and it was more comprehensive and really, in my opinion, had more to offer in terms of deep psychology and mind training, the mental, emotional, body, mind connection, deep spiritual practices, whatever your religion is, community, all of these supports that can really bolster one up in their life. And also the paradigm, the philosophy itself, for me, was so comprehensive and it made so much sense. And I just wanted to make it as accessible for people as possible and help connect the dots and tie it all together with what is actually happening psychologically and why it can be so healing. So, I've been weaving yoga and psychology together, wrote my master's thesis on it, started my training, my yoga teacher trainings, and then other online trainings that we have. And now we have a platform, yoga mental health platform called The Haven, which is really exciting. And we're really just relaunching it this fall, actually.
I'm thinking as you're speaking, I didn't know that you went to Pacifica. I'm actually a Pacifica Jungian psychology PhD dropout, and I did a semester in Jungian studies, and I went there, and it was so unbelievable. Like having, I got a master's in Hindu psychology, and to go there and learn Jungian psychology, what was so astonishing for me was just the whole way of being as a scholar and an academic, and like that state as a consciousness itself, like the scholarly academic path is a state, it's a psychological state.
The archetype.
Exactly, the scholar. And I loved it. Like I ate it up, but I also was like, I'm a yogi, so it was like I was dying,
Yeah.
actually. I was like, I cannot sit here and
I
I
know.
loved it, but it was so disembodying for me.
Uh-huh.
I have to do like 2 months of, embodiment work after that. But what I also noticed was that as I was taking this in from that intellectual portal, which scholars love, um, Jungian psychology, it seems to me, is Western magic. And so
Mm.
let's just dive in. So, like, what is, when you hear the word healing, what does to heal mean to you? Because that's what we're all kind of moving towards, whether it be your Haven platform or we do Ayurveda, like we're all going towards this place. What is that
I
word?
think, yeah, I think in a nutshell, hey, healing means integration. It means connection. It's just like yoga. The word yoga means to yoke. And in Jungian psychology, Jung kind of came up with this phenomenon, or discovered or named this phenomenon called the transcendent function, which is really about yoking together and holding two opposing things at the same time, but then allowing a third state to evolve out of that. In other words, how do we integrate all of these binaries that we live in this world, whether it's masculine, feminine, yin, yang, solar, lunar, whether it's shadow, light, mind, body, personal, collective or individual, connected to the universal self, and or all of the disparate parts within ourself, all of the different parts of our psyche, all of the different voices in our head, the different archetypes that we play out. How do we bring them together, and what is their relationship? To me, healing and yoga is really about improving our relationships to different parts of ourselves, intrapsychically, to other people interpersonally. And when we can do that and create a more optimized relationship, and it doesn't mean everything's going to be a 50-50 balance. We know that that's not true. It's the flow of it. It's the dance, the tango of it. And it's in constant flux. And so it requires us to be present. It requires us to hold the space and hold what Jung called the tension of the opposites. And in particularly Western culture, we're so conditioned on this binary that it's a zero-sum game, that one is better than the other, or that everything has to be equal. And the Eastern approach has a much more fluid accessibility, and allows us to, there are different waves that we ride, different phases of our life. But it really requires us to open and strengthen our own capacity to hold more of that tension between the opposites. So if we're talking psychologically and what is healing, we could look at, bringing the shadow into the light, making peace or making meaning of things in our life that maybe haven't gone our way, traumas that we might experience, challenges in our own minds or in our own body. How do we make peace with that? And a key component of that is making meaning of it and seeing the value of it, even if it's not, especially when it's not how we might like it to be.
Ashley, thank you. That's so beautiful. I want to just highlight one of the things that you said, the transcendent function, because I have never heard it exactly explained that way. This holding two oppositional things in our hands at once, and that there's this third thing that emerges. I really love that. I think there's this obsession. I notice it in myself and in the students that we work with, of like, I want to get it right. I want to be good. Right. And to be able to hold the parts of you that you might label bad and good, and that can be held. But also, I've never heard it said that way, of this third thing. I've said it, but I've never heard it in a Jungian way, of the transcendent function that actually emerges out of holding those two oppositional forces. And I think we can get so caught in that, I need to be one. I'm either one or the other.
Either or, instead of both and. Yeah.
And I mean, talk about relationships. So if that's true, then I'm the good one and you're the bad one.
Right.
Has to be. And then we can flip flop. Of course, now I'm the shithead and now you're the good one. I'm sorry. So I think this is like this is very easy to talk about, but so real and raw and tender to do it within oneself, and then of course in relationship with others. So we mentioned this word shadow, and I want to come back to that because I think we've talked about it before in the podcast in different language, but what does shadow work mean maybe for someone who's hearing this phrase for the first time in their lives? Like, what is shadow and what is shadow work?
Yeah, I want to just circle back because I think the transcendent function, and then I want to tackle the shadow. But I love one of the analogies that I use in that transcendent function, because it's the idea of holding the tension of the opposites, which is so challenging. And all of our conditioning is, for the most part, either or, not both and so just that simple, that's a great tool for those of you listening to just shift. How can you shift in any moment to a both and? Could both be true at the same time? Could my partner have a really good point and could we both be right?
Yeah.
But one of Jung's discoveries was, if you hold those two, and really be with and be present to both of them and explore both of them, that tension of the opposites eventually will spawn a third, which is that transcendent function, and that you then sort of up level, or you launch into the next orbit of awareness where there's a whole new understanding of things. And it's very yogic, right? The two into the one. And one of the examples I use is, which I think is quite common in a relationship. I just kind of wanted to ground this for everyone listening, because I think it might be applicable for some of you. I know it is for myself. In a relationship, we might be wondering, is this the right one? Am I going to stay? Oh, we just got in an argument. I can't stand when he does this or she does that. There's no way we're going to make it, So you're in this dichotomy of, is it or isn't it? Are we good? Are we forever, or are we not? And instead of even asking that question, just being present with, well, if you're not ready to leave and you're not ready to break up, then you're still in it. You're in a relationship and it's unfolding. It's revealing itself to you. And I think it just gives us so much more permission to be present with what is, instead of needing to make it one thing or the other. Of course, there are many things you love and adore about this person, or you probably wouldn't be with them. And there are many things that are challenging and may even end up being non-negotiables. And at this moment, you're holding that tension of the opposites. And then eventually, at some point in time, it will reveal itself if there's a new phase, if there's a new creation that's supposed to come out of that, a new, iteration.
I want to say, before we go into shadow, let me just tell you, the listeners, another example that's not like a partnership in the sense of relating to an intimate partner. This morning, I was taking a walk in the country on these little country roads, and people go fast. And so I was up on the embankment, and I have an 11-month-old puppy who is literally my child. Like, I'm obsessed with my dog. I've never had a baby in this lifetime. So I care for this dog more than anything in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're walking and we're bonded, like on a whole other level. And out of nowhere come these barreling at us two big dogs, and they attack Ojas, my dog. And big time, right? Like, and so I had to reach down, grab up my little tiny puppy and hold her. And then they came for me. And so the owners came, trigger warning, the owners came out and got their dogs, and I ran away. And like, the owners, I looked back and I was yelling at them, like, get your dogs, and I looked at them, Ashley, and having studied a lot of somatics and nervous system stuff over the past 5 years, I was like, they are in shock. And I could see that they weren't mean or bad. They were in shock. And I was in fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
And all of it was very appropriate, right? Like, and then as I walked away, I got more and more angry, and I watched myself go into, I'm the victim and they're the perpetrator. I'm innocent walking my mini Bernedoodle, and they are the asshole. Like, I watched how my mind so badly wanted to make them the assholes.
Yeah, that's right. Right and wrong. Mm-hmm.
And especially because they didn't even say they were sorry. Long story short,
that's tough.
but then I realized, once I calmed down, and longer story, because the owner of this house was like, they're the nicest people. They were in shock and couldn't speak.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I wanted to polarize so fast in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And by actually just doing my practices and letting the dust clear, I could sense the holistic view of the situation, which was actually no blame was required,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we have this tendency to want to go so fast into shame, blame, whatever. Even I consider myself like someone that's really practicing these things, and yet that was still so alive in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can just couch all of this in something which is, this is really hard to overcome
Yes.
these
Yes.
tendencies.
Yes. I loved that line. That's a tweetable. No blame is required. Like if I could just live by that. Like my partner and I had a little moment this morning and it was like, and we're both, it's just, but you're right. I'm right and you're wrong. No, I'm right and you're wrong. It was just like, and so locked in there. No blame is required. It's how can we expand both our hearts and I would say our bodies also to be able to contain that. And then of course our minds to hold both at the same time.
Mm.
I love that. No blame is required. And your point is so valid. It is so difficult to practice these things, even when we know it, like
Especially,
intellectually knowing it. And that's why I think your
yeah.
point of, back to Pacifica and being embodied, like intellectually knowing it and studying something is one thing. We can know it and we can believe it, but actually putting it into practice is a whole other
And
thing.
the thing is, like, and this is kind of where I am with my tantric practices, there are different levels of reality, right? And
Mhm.
so there is a level-based chakra, this, right? You're so averse in this, but like on a first level survival circuit, my reaction of fight, flight, yelling back at them, I was proud of myself. I was like, that was a very adept, appropriate, energetically savvy
Right.
thing to do. And yet, then we go into all of these other dialectical narratives around it that actually spin the web of karma and keep it in my body
Yes, this is
and
good.
implant it more in there. And now we're in this like whole freaking sorcery shit that we do to one another. And I just was
Right.
like, all right, pause button, Silcox. Like, no need for sorcery. Like, you don't have to start
Unravel.
putting
Yes.
the arrows of hatred over the neighbor's yard, right? Like,
So true. This is so true. I love that you're connecting these dots because this is how we weave our reality and we don't even realize we're doing it. It's unconscious
and then we
for
wonder,
the most part.
why does this keep happening? And that's
Yes.
obviously the karmic repetition compulsion. So let's bring this, because I think it's a good way to get in there. So shadow work.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
is it? What is the shadow? And then we'll talk about how we work with it.
Well, so shadow, I mean, is everything that you're kind of explaining. This is such a great story to depict it. Shadow from a Jungian perspective is anything in our psyche, in our being, that we have some way deemed inappropriate, or that society or the culture that we grew up in, our family system, the cultural mores, conditioned us to cut off and disown, essentially. So therefore it's relegated into our unconscious. We sort of push it away under the rug in the back closet of our psyche. We don't want to look at it. We don't want that to be a part of ourselves. And so anything that we have not fully owned and that we're not fully exploring and that we have anything that we've disowned and cut off is in our shadow. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're negative traits either, because sometimes we can place positive attributes in our shadow. So it means that we're not embracing them, we're not integrating them. And therefore, what do we do with that is we project it out onto someone else. And we see, therefore, that's how we all become these mirrors for each other. Everyone is reflecting to us different facets of ourselves. And so it's much easier to see it in someone else than to take a look and say, whoa, I actually really do that. This is me. Or how do I do that? And, Jung famously said, if we don't explore our shadow, our unconscious then runs our life. It will be the force, the primary force that is running our life. And so we will keep seeing these things in a holographic universe. We see these things outside of ourselves, and we see it in the outer world instead of recognizing where it might live within ourselves.
And we
So,
often marry our shadows.
right, exactly.
Have sex with our shadows.
Yeah, have sex with, exactly, that Scorpion, dark sex magic. It is true that, and even in the feminine and masculine, and it doesn't have to be a heterosexual relationship, but the feminine attributes, or say of a woman or female identifying person, we can often tend to project the more masculine attributes onto a partner and vice versa. So I use the example, if my parents were in a very standard sort of gender roles growing up, and my father primarily took care of all the finances. He was the primary breadwinner. Even though my mother definitely contributed from a large part of our life, she was a homemaker and took care of us, which, as we know, and me as a mother now, is enormous work, more hours than working at a full-time job. Anyway, but I was never really educated or conditioned to own my financial systems. And so I've had a tendency in my life to project that out onto my partner and just, oh, they'll handle it. My last relationship, I really looked to him like, oh, we're going to be good because he's making really good money, or he's really handling that, instead of taking that on and saying, oh, I'm going to own this. I'm going to be autonomous and own these attributes. Much like in, the reverse gender roles, often men or more male identifying people might project over the emotional labor in a relationship, and a woman might be holding more of that, or female identifying holding more of that, where it's really the man's activation to become more familiarized and skillful at owning their emotional and intimate self, instead of assuming the woman's going to take care of that kind of stuff.
Speak to that really quick. If anyone's like, oh my God, this is ringing my bell, there's a book on anima and animus that Jung wrote, that and his disciple Marie Louise von Franz, who I think is probably one of his best disciple writers, she speaks to this very thing. And I think so many women, we have mostly women listeners, and they'll really get something out of this, because what happens in that second scenario, Ashley, that you elucidated, is that then, as he refuses consciously or unconsciously to do the quote emotional labor, his own internal feeling experience, he will project it onto her. And then she flips into that more masculine that in fact becomes enraged with the fact that he won't do it. And I think this is like the little secret we have in these types of dynamics, where it's, and I just watched the queer version of The Ultimatum. By the way, if you want to watch these dynamics play out in all women, it like you said, it has nothing to do with genitalia. It's like all these women are dancing the anima animus, and they are getting so mad at the ones who won't feel. And so then we become these sort of tyrannical, authoritarian sort of lords over these unfeeling, more feminized men. And it's fascinating. But how do you work with, if by definition the shadow is that which we are unaware of, and yet it's running, how does one then work with their shadow?
Yeah. I mean, it's like one of my old friends and spiritual sort of brothers used to say, the ego is like a chameleon, and it will masquerade itself in any form that you give it, so it is very slippery. It's very tricky. And, there are some core tools. And number one, I think, is triggers, and noticing when you're triggered. Anytime you're triggered by someone, you are definitely, it's coming up in you because it's something that it doesn't sit well. You haven't accepted about yourself. So you might be, for example, I mean, I could just take my partner. We could take each other. We have a really, it's so clear, and we just keep getting triggered by the same thing over and over and over, so if I'm triggered that he, is impatient or gets angry, you could take anger, and I'm saying, you don't have to get so angry. You don't have to get so upset. I need to look at, where is that anger in myself? What does my anger look like? How does it present? So anytime we have a trigger, that's an indication. Anytime we are defensive or we get aggressive in our response, it's a good indication that you're pressing on something that, is unresolved within you. Anytime there's something that these are signs to know if your shadow is present, if your shadow is running the show. Anytime there are things that you may not want someone to know about you, or you kind of hide over here in the secret. I think I use the example of when you start dating someone, of course, the first 3 months ish, that honeymoon period is when our persona is running the show. I do this exercise in my teacher training to explain shadow, and I layer people on the stage, in front of each other. And so the honeymoon phase isn't even you connecting with the other person. It's your persona and all of these character styles and personality traits that you have built up around you, is sort of the outer mask that you present, that you want to be perceived in the world. But then underneath of the persona is the defense mechanisms, the character styles, the, personality traits. So if you think about when you start dating someone or you start falling in love, what are those things that you don't really want that other person to know about you, or maybe you're hoping they'll never find out? So these are some good clues as to what some of your shadow attributes might be. But I really think the biggest one is what triggers you about other people.
I would also kind of to that say it's, for me, been explained and it's been really helpful. It's when you have any kind of reaction that overreaches the situation.
Yeah,
So
disproportionate
that's
reaction.
right. So like you and I go on that same walk, we're with my dog. I lose it, right? And then I come back home and I'm like shaking and crying, and I didn't do what I did today, but I like can't stop talking about it for the rest of the day and blah blah blah. And you've already gotten over it, right? Like
Yeah.
the reactivity is disproportionate to the actual event. And I look at so much of what's going on in our world, and you're just, I'm sure you do too as a Jungian, where not only are we doing this personally, but then we do it collectively. So it's like, I'm not like this, you are, right? And then we do it to groups of people. It's like now we're looking at the projections on a socio-cultural, even globally cultural level.
Yeah. I mean, I think a really good example of this that we, just lived through in the United States, at least, is the Trump era. And, it's still going on, but Trump was for many people such an easy villain and such an easy person for all of us to project, the worst attributes for, it's not even about political, sides, but it's just, he was vilified by so many people and was really hard to accept and hard to even explore the nature of who he is for many of us. I'll include myself in that. And yet the teaching is, let me look at
Amen.
whatever I'm seeing, greed, disrespect, meanness, lies, and we could go on.
Selfishness.
Yeah, selfishness, egomaniac, whatever the attributes are that I'm going to associate or I'm going to name him as. And I just use it because it's a really vivid example. And then I have to shine that mirror back on myself and say, and I have an exercise that I learned from one of my teachers, I'll share in a moment, that's really helpful, and say, okay, where do I lie? Maybe I don't even lie to other people, but maybe I lie to myself. Maybe I'm in denial about things I don't want to look at in my life. Okay, that's lying. Where am I greedy? I'm definitely greedy. I'm definitely self-centered and self-absorbed in my life, for sure. It's not usually running the show, but it's there. It's definitely there. Sometimes it does run the show. Where am I, where can I be mean, or where can I be disrespectful, or where do I, so you just look at all those things and how they live in yourself. So one way that if your shadow is still running the show is if you still have a charge around something. So take something in your past, maybe a family member or a parent or an old lover, somewhere that you felt, hurt or spurned. And if you still have a charge around it, if you still get a little bitchy, or you still want to talk about them behind their back, or you still, when you retell the story, if it's triggering for you, you can feel that energy, that charge in your body, then there's still work to do. And there's no shame. I mean, what we're really talking about also with the shadow is shame. Because if we disowned a part of ourselves that we don't want to embrace or even acknowledge could possibly exist within us, then we have shame around it. We are ashamed of being that way. When we can own it, and I use it in the chakra system, I talk a lot about it with the third chakra, the power center, which is our sense of self, our sense of our ego identity. And ego is not bad. It's not a wrong thing. We all have an individual sense of self. That's our ego structure. We want to have a healthy ego structure. And it's kind of got a bad rap. But we want to have a healthy, balanced ego, which means I can own all of my goodness, all of my magic, all my genius and talents and gifts, and fully embrace those. If someone gives me a compliment, I can really acknowledge that and own that. But equally, I own all of my shadows and my weaknesses. And I can say, you know what? I did that. I'm really not good at that. This is something, I'm so sorry. Let me work on that. So we don't have shame around it. When we have shame around it, we're pushing it further into the unconscious, into the shadow. We're again denying that we could be anything like that. And so what we're actually seeking is a balanced ego, where, as my teacher Mona Miller used to say, we can love all the beautiful and all of the ugly, and they're equal. They're not even, we don't need to value them better or worse, going back to that binary. And so that middle path in yoga and Buddhism is really what we're seeking, is owning all of that. So
Really, really good, Ashley. Yeah. Go
thank
ahead.
you. Not easy, because as I'm saying this, I'm realizing all the stuff this morning that I was like, you're like this and you're like that.
Well,
And
I
it's
want to
like,
say something that's really important for everyone to hear. I want to say it to you as a friend and publicly as well. Like what Ashley just said about Trump is really brave. And when he first got voted in 8 years ago, whenever it was, I was much younger. I came onto Facebook and I was like crying, right? And I did this whole
yeah.
prayer and meditation. I was sobbing and I was really upset. And then I realized how much that charge was hurting me. And I did a Tibetan tantric practice on Trump as a good tantrika. And it was brutal, because you have to imagine that you're holding, it's different than Jungian a little bit, but not in the sense you imagine that you're holding him in your arms as if he were your baby. And then I watched a documentary on him. And by watching that documentary as like a psychologist lover myself, it was so very, very obvious why he is the way he is, and how any of us might have turned out that way had we had that experience. And I never had the charge around him again. It's not that I don't have similar triggers, but I think what's so key is that we could take it even to the next level. And I think Jung does a good job at this. And of course, Buddhism and yoga do an incredible job at this. And that is, once we've made, and I want to kind of hear your thoughts around this too, as a practitioner, like once we've done our psychotherapy, once we've done a lot of work on ourselves, once we've understood our family dynamics, our triggers, we've done some trauma work, etc., what the ancients encourage us to do beyond that initial yana yoga is that state, which was once our dream of where we could be and was like attainment, the greatest attainment, to be aware of these things, now becomes our hindrance if we remain identified with ourselves as those quote parts. And so it almost is as if this evolutionary impulse is inviting us out of what Chogyam Trungpa calls the spiritual materialism, which is, I'm now attached to using my therapy or using my yoga to in betterment of myself, but it's still self-focused. And I'm really working with that right now, of like, wow, the whole setup, despite 20 plus years of tantric yoga and psychotherapy, the whole setup is still self-serving. I mean, there are, of course, moments of utter and complete service, but a lot of the whole dramas are because of the fact that I'm hoping it's going to work out for good for me. And like,
Mm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, it's like the most innate human impulse is desire, and that we feel good and that our beloveds are good as well. But really, Tantra takes it to this next level of like, if you really want freedom, if you really want to take the nectar of a taste the nectar of a bliss that's enduring,
Mm.
one must actually abandon the self-serving impulse, even to be enlightened or even to go beyond triggers. And so I'm curious if that's kind of come up for you too, as
Mm.
you and I are sort of kind of on that journey of life where midlife, you're starting to kind of be like, is this it? Like,
Yes.
I have this and I have that, and I did this and I did that, and you're quite accomplished. And I know our listeners out there will identify with that as well. Like, what else is there beyond
Yeah.
this thing?
Yeah, you just open a whole portal, which I love. It's a huge teaching. What you're naming is a huge teaching, is that essentially that shift in consciousness from the level of, and this is really I work a lot with the chakra system as sort of a cornerstone map of my work, moving from the third chakra level of awareness to the fourth chakra level of awareness, where I move from seeing the world through the lens of me and mine.
Right.
And as you just said, like, do I have what I need, and my people that I love have what I need? Are we good? To a higher level of awareness in the heart, which is we are one. And I also want to name what you said earlier. There are different levels of reality coexisting simultaneously. In other words, yes, on one level, you and I are separate beings. You're an individual self. I'm an individual human being. And on another level, in that namaste place, or that transcendent unified field, we are the same. We are all made of the same spiritual material, and sharing a collective unconscious, and we're working on each other, and there is a that real unified field. So if I move into that state of awareness and I'm looking at the world as that unified field, then in more of like that bodhisattva,
That's right,
nature of my work is not done until all beings are liberated. And so it moves the emphasis and the impetus out of my own individual benefit and well-being and into the collective. And that's a huge shift. And, I will say very hard for me to do. I'm certainly not there. I'm definitely primarily focused on myself and my people.
And I love that you're saying that, because I think, like, even when, and I have done a lot of yoga within the tantric system, where it's like, pump your body, breathe this way, visualize this, invite in this deity, visualize her petals, blah, 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 and on and on. And I did this like a mad banshee for a decade. And I was like 2 hours of this like intensive tantric practice, so much of it very, very beautiful. And I'm very happy that I was able to learn. But there is such an emphasis on attainment. And so even when we sit down to meditate, like, I think there's this layer of it where it's like, I hope this pranayama yields good results for me. And like to openly be able to speak about how that's so pervasive in the quote yoga wellness world.
Selfish.
Exactly. It's like, be okay with it and not shame or blame, but to just be like, look, even your teachers are struggling with this because it's so innate. And then if we can, I've been learning about this thing called the hungry ghosts realm.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't eat enough, right? Like, I've got to get more. I need to keep getting more and more. And the way out of the hungry ghost realm is to dedicate the fruits of the practice, but for real, like not just like as a initiation prayer, but like to really be like, let's play this out, Ashley. That's what you just said. So I get enlightened, and then what? Like, that's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. So I get out of the hell of samsara, right? And then I'm just free. See you later, guys. Good luck, right? Whereas the heart, you said, bodhisattva, it's like, I'm here with you. And like, as you're saying it, my heart opens to you as my friend. It's like, oh my God, she gets it. And so now I could even feel it just as you're speaking, like the heart field starts to open, and now we're kind of in an ocean together. Sure, we're floating as little buoys, but like we're in this together rather than like the atomized planets like orbiting around.
Mm.
We think everyone's orbiting around us.
Yep. And everybody's so concerned about themselves. Nobody's really paying attention to you. Trust me.
Okay, guys, remember this. Exactly. You aren't that important, like to everyone else. And I think, oh my God, I said that the wrong way. She's going to be blah, 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 or blah, blah, blah. And like, it's like, no, no one even noticed. Like,
Yeah. I think one, I think I think this is a really helpful teaching for teachers or those in the service industry or creatives, because I know with a lot of my students, there's a lot of imposter syndrome or lack of confidence or, holding back, playing small out of fear, insecurity, which is a fairly universal, I would say almost universal experience. People have self-doubt, and it's baked into humanity, the human nature. And it's sort of the Course of Miracles teaching of, yes, you are special and you're not special at all. Both are true at the same time. You're a blessed, beautiful, perfect prism of reality, and you're part of this massive, inconceivable matrix. And we're all disposable on some level, in that sense. So both are true at the same time. But I think it can be a really helpful teaching for those that are teachers, because if you really the reason you're showing up is not to be super creative or super dynamic or charismatic or for that ego stroking. You're showing up to really be in service. And you're saying, you know what? I know these teachings can help people. I know that what I have to bring or what I've learned can help more people. And I just want to proliferate that and spread that and help give other people tools, help them unwind a few things along the way. Then your work doesn't become about you. And when you can make that shift to really set the core intention and the underlying, infrastructure of your work to be about to be about your students, your clients, whomever you're serving, it takes the onus off of you, and it can help people move through those fears and insecurities because it's not about you in the first place.
Well, and I say this to students too, because ironically, the more it's not about you and it's about service, the less fear you have of putting it out in the world, of even marketing yourself. When I'm afraid of marketing myself is because I'm self-centered. I'm self-focused. And the moment I'm like, dude, this is about the power of Ayurveda, or for you, the power of yogic psychology. And like, if you really hold that to be your impetus, you actually can put yourself out there and, a new way.
Yeah. So I do want to connect that dot because I think it's really, really important. And then back to, even like core relationships, family, romance. If we are on the same playing field, and then how can I support you in this? How can I uplift you instead of that adversarial, me versus you? And if we can make that shift consciously as much as possible in every single moment, my function in being here in this moment with you is, how can I support, uplift, shine a light, and help you get more of what you want or awaken, and it changes the whole game. The whole game changes.
What would this experience be like if there were no threads of adversarial nature on my heart? Or even better, there might be. And like,
yes,
can I just see, okay, there's the thread of adversary. And when you start to open to seeing this, and I've been doing a lot of the shadow work too, and it's like, I'm just going to be willing to open and see this. It goes from being overt to the subtle ways, like the subtle strands of how we make others slightly the enemy or the adversary, even the people that are our biggest allies.
Yeah. I see how I do that a lot with gossip. Like, I'll just want to say a little thing or like do a little thing, or even if I'm just thinking it, even if I don't share it, I'm really trying to not even say it, but to then stop myself from even thinking, or when I'm thinking something critical, essentially it's judgment, it's my own self-judgment projected outwards, is to notice the thought and then be curious. So curiosity is a core tenet of this work, and being curious about, why did I feel like why do I want them to be wrong? Why do I want them to make a mistake or want to be judgmental of them for something, instead of my teacher, Mona Miller, and this is one of my core principles that guides all of my work, and I forget it all the time, but is moving from judgment to understanding. And she would say the whole game is just to move from judgment to understanding. Can you understand how they could possibly have had that? Like exactly what you said about Trump,
And a dog lady,
and it doesn't mean condoning. It doesn't mean I
or leaving an abusive situation.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you have to support them or but it means that you can release the judgment and then take right action. We are taking right action, ethical action, but not from a place of judgment and righteousness.
Beautiful. So I know we have limited time with you, Ashley. We have a few minutes left, and I like to ask listeners, guests at the end of the podcast. So we've got all our friends driving along the superhighway, and if there were one thing that could be written on the spiritual billboard to their right as they take that exit, what would you write for everyone to hear?
Wow, that's no small question. I come back to this quote from the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching was the first Eastern text that I read. Thank goodness. I fell in love with it. And I believe it's Shloka 45, although someone can correct me if I'm wrong. It's not the whole thing, but the start of it, the first passage is, true perfection seems imperfect, yet it is perfectly itself. And then it goes on, true straightness seems crooked. True art seems artless. And the master sees what is and allows things to be as they are. And I love the first few lines, like true perfection seems imperfect, yet it is perfectly itself. And it's sort of the same thing that we've been talking about this whole time, which is allowing things to be as they are, allowing that both and, allowing our imperfections and recognizing them as our perfections, being perfectly imperfect. And that's life, and that's ourselves, and that's each other and the world. So again, it changes the whole paradigm and context, and we can make peace with things and allow them to be, even if, again, like my partner and I are fighting, or we have this thing that we just can't seem to get past. Can I see the perfection in that? Doesn't mean I'm not going to still work to improve it and optimize and heal and integrate, but it softens the edges, and we're not so, we're not so judgmental. It releases the judgment of it. So true perfection seems imperfect, yet it is perfectly itself.
It reminds me of my mentor, Crystal Mortensen says, enlightenment is staying open to what is without fixation, without mental fixation, just opening, just staying open.
I love that.
Well, Ashley, this was such a needed conversation for me personally. I know we have one more minute, but I just want to say, you being with you, it's such a paradox, because you guys that can't see Ashley, she's this big, beautiful blonde bombshell, and it makes me, and yet what a fountain of knowledge and information and wisdom and embodiment. And it reminds me of the quote from Jungian studies when I was at Pacifica, that Jung was known as a guru, a charlatan, a healer, a guide, a professor, a wise man, a narcissist. Like he was the ultimate thing that people project upon, ironically. And when I'm with you, I can imagine that you are also this vast Renaissance woman. Like I identify with that as well, where it's so easy to actually also become the sort of absorptive portal for such a variety of projections. And so I just want to bow to you in all of your facets. You've just been a joy to be with, and I hope we can be friends and continue this conversation in a number of different ways down the road.
I'm so excited. Wow. Thank you so much for those very kind and generous words. And you too, Katie. It's just a mirror. I feel the same. I'm so excited to be more connected, and I definitely need this level of, depth and conversation and sisterhood. And yeah, I feel like I got my own little therapy session here today. It's so much easier to see it in other people and not in yourself. So it's helpful to take some reflection, be like, okay, let me get to work again.
I mean, well, okay, let's end on this one phrase from my mama, Vera Silcox, who loved her some Jesus. And she would read the Bible to me and she would say, honey, to whom much is given, much is required.
Yeah,
So,
it's true.
we've been given a lot of gifts just knowing these teachings. And so, thank you so much, Ashley, for being here.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for everyone listening. Feel free to reach out on Instagram. DM is probably the best way to connect with me. Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll make sure we'll put all of Ashley's classes and courses and links and her subscription program in the show notes. And as always, we're happy to serve you at Spirit Sessions. And we'll see you guys soon. Thanks, Ashley.
A big special thanks to Kevin Carlisle of Goodbye Gemini, who wrote this beautiful podcast music, and to DJ Juan Pablo Jimenez in southern Spain for mixing it and making it magic.